The way we see it, RAM is a very interesting piece of hardware in that everyone understands that it's essential in order for the PC to operate, and maybe they even understand why it's essential, but still, to many casual gamers, the inner machinations of its specs and how they relate to in-game performance are an enigma. Now, we don't think that everyone needs to have an in-depth understanding of how rocks were taught to think in order to enjoy playing video games, but it is pretty common for people who aren't familiar with what to look for in a RAM stick to be taken advantage of. Have you ever wanted to buy a pre-made gaming PC and looked in awe at its 8GB of 4000 MHz RAM and thought, now that's gotta be worth the extra money? That's why in today's video we'll be taking a look at 5 of the best RAM sticks that you could get, and we'll also talk about the things you need to keep in mind and why when shopping for RAM. So without any further ado, let's begin. First up, we have a product that many of you are probably already familiar with. Kingston is one of the best manufacturers of all things memory related, and the Fury Black is one of their most successful models. So if you know your RAM even a little bit, this one should come as no surprise. But what exactly makes this product so successful? Well, it's a combination of things. You got the affordable price tag, the cool looking heatsink that's both practical and aesthetically pleasing, and the down-to-earth clock speeds that most gamers generally use. The Fury Black has models with 3 different clock speeds: 2133 MHz, 2400 MHz, and 2666 MHz, with the latter two achieved through automatic overclocking. We'll talk about this a bit more after the list, but RAM speed isn't as big a deal for gaming as RAM capacity, and the Fury Black gives you just what you need. Overall, it's just an incredibly cost-effective product, and we don't have anything bad to say about it, except maybe that it only comes in 3 colors. If this feels a little like nitpicking, that's because it is. Next up, we have another entry by Kingston, also from the HyperX line, the Predator Black. It strikes a lot of the same beats as the Fury Black. You've got the black exterior, the built-in heatsink, the overclocking potential, but it isn't as popular as the Fury Black. Is it because it's worse, you ask? No, it's actually because it's better, technically. Or at the very least, it has a higher power ceiling. Kind of like Robin and Batman in a world where Robin is the more popular character. While most DDR4 modules start with 2133 MHz as the base clock speed, the slowest that the HyperX Predator Black goes is 2400 MHz, and its maximum speed is 3600 MHz, roughly 1000 MHz higher than the Fury Black. This means that if you're performance-oriented, you'll find a lot to love in the HyperX Predator Black, mostly due to the excellent overclocking potential and the great build. It's not the best high-end RAM solution around, but it's definitely a step up from what you would use in most basic builds. If there's one thing to complain about, however, it would be the lack of customization options. Even the Fury Black, a basic solution, had 3 color options. If you're looking for ways to maximize RAM, chances are you aren't building a budget PC and would appreciate having some options here. The black exterior is unobtrusive enough to be used in most builds, so at least there's some silver lining, but we would have really liked to see some variety. Now here's a strange entry, the Corsair Vengeance LPX. It's not a controversial entry by any means, seeing as it's both quite popular and well praised. The company name alone carries as much goodwill in the gaming industry as Kingston, and the LPX series has been around for a long time. What we meant by strange was that this entry doesn't cater to any particular type of gamer, unlike the previous two. If you need a basic RAM kit that costs about the same as the HyperX Fury Predator and performs just as well, you got it. Want to make your PC ascend to a higher plane of performance with a clock speed of 4000 MHz? No problem, the Vengeance LPX has you covered. With models ranging in clock speed from 2133 MHz to 4600 MHz, it gets hard to tell who this series was intended for. The most likely answer is everybody. And we don't mean to say that the faster models aren't good. But what we've noticed is that as the capacity increases, the cost effectiveness of the Vengeance LPX drops relative to what the competition offers. For example, the HyperX Predator Black 32GB kit operating at 3000 MHz with 4 8GB sticks costs just under $300. But it costs just over $400 to get the same deal with the Vengeance LPX cards. Conversely, the 16GB dual-channel solution operating at 2400 MHz will cost $100 if you're using the Vengeance LPX RAM and $140 if you're using the Predator Black RAM. So the way we see it, this RAM works best if you need a basic solution. This means not too great a capacity and a relatively low clock speed. The more you start to spec your PC like a high-end workstation, the more this RAM will lose its value. Also, while we do like the many color options, they're kind of cheap looking, which gets proportionally more irritating as the cost effectiveness drops. Now, what's not cheap looking is the Corsair Dominator Platinum. This RAM card looks like it got jacked to absolutely dominate the high-end RAM market, and let's just say its efforts didn't go to waste. The Dominator Platinum is a bit bulkier than your average RAM module with a customizable metal bar on the top for that absolute premium feel. It even comes in two better performing variants, Torque and SC. But we're not here to talk about these. So what does the Dominator Platinum have going for it? The most important thing has got to be the clock speed. It covers speeds from 2133 MHz to 4000 MHz. Now this may not sound that impressive after we already said pretty much the same thing for the Vengeance LPX, but the thing about the Dominator Platinum is that it's much better equipped to handle the higher speeds, thanks to its high-quality aluminum heatsink. It may be a bit bulky and a bit expensive, but it makes do on overclocking promises like no other model on this list. So if you're looking for the best high-end RAM regardless of the price, then there's no other model that we can recommend as earnestly as the Dominator Platinum. Of course, sometimes you don't want to overclock your RAM to an insane level for your high-end gaming rig. Sometimes you just want to connect all the hardware, boot up your PC, gaze longingly into your transparent tempered glass computer case, and just enjoy the eye candy. If this is you, then we only have one RAM card to recommend, the G.Skill Trident Z RGB. G.Skill may not be as well known as Corsair or Kingston, but they aren't any less reliable, and the Trident Z RGB is without a doubt the most gorgeous looking entry on this list, seamlessly blending a metallic exterior with a beautifully implemented RGB lighting. Of course, you aren't buying RAM just to look at it, no matter how visually stunning it is. So how well does the Trident perform? Well enough. Allegedly, it can operate on frequencies anywhere up to 4233 MHz, but you should take this with a grain of salt. If nothing else, the RGB hampers the overclocking potential quite a bit, so we'd say that a realistic frequency ceiling is somewhere around 3600 MHz. If you're only interested in next level performance, then this certainly isn't a jaw-dropping number, especially after the Dominator Platinum, but it's still more than you'll ever need for gaming. Regardless, it's still good to know what you should expect. So the bottom line is, the Trident Z RGB is an excellent RAM card with great overall value, but it does trade in some overclocking potential in favor of looking absolutely amazing. Whether it's the right pick for you will depend largely on how much value you put in having your case display the same level of eye candy as your monitor. So now that we've seen what the RAM scene has to offer, let's turn our attention to what you should look for when purchasing RAM. Without going too in-depth, here are 4 basics to keep in mind: capacity, clock speed, latency, and arrangement. The first and most important thing is capacity. Actually, that's a lie. The type of RAM is technically more important, but seeing as how DDR4 is the standard, and how you'd have to go out of your way to buy another type of RAM, this is kind of a moot point. So yeah, capacity is effectively number 1. So how much do you actually need? For modern gaming, 8GB of RAM is the bare minimum, and that's if you're very conscientious about closing all unnecessary background processes while gaming. Honestly, we'd say that it's the bare minimum even if gaming isn't a priority. Just running Windows eats RAM, and browsers are getting more RAM hungry by the day. If you want to guarantee a smooth and convenient gaming experience without having to close everything before pressing start, then 16GB is the way to go. Now, what you don't want to do is go above 16GB of RAM, not if you're building a gaming PC. We know that more is generally better as far as hardware is concerned, but having 32 or 64GB of RAM will simply not do anything for gaming. It's just money that could have been invested into something that will increase performance. Next up, let's look at clock speeds. We've talked a lot about clock speeds when we highlighted the entries on our list, but to be perfectly honest, RAM clock speed just isn't all that important. Yes, a faster RAM card will perform a bit better, but this performance margin is largely inconsequential in most cases. At the very least, you should never prioritize speed over capacity until you have the full 16GB. What you should always remember, especially if you're on a budget, is that 16GB of 2133 MHz RAM is way better than 8GB of 3200 MHz of RAM. 2133 MHz may be the lowest clock speed that DDR4 memory supports, but it's honestly just fine for gaming. A 2400 MHz RAM will, at the very best, give you 5 more FPS in a AAA game than a 2133 MHz RAM will. It's just not that big a deal. And what's even less big of a deal is latency. Cast latency, or CL, determines how long it takes for a command issued by the CPU to be received by the RAM module. The greater the RAM capacity, the higher the CL. But the thing is, the difference between the currently fastest and slowest RAM modules in terms of latency is entirely negligible. It used to be a way bigger deal, but nowadays it's completely inconsequential. And finally, there's the arrangement. What we mean by this is simply whether you'll be buying a single RAM card or a kit. Both options come with their own pros and cons, so let's consider them for a second. Going single channel has the benefit of being more future-proof, since you can buy a single 8GB RAM card now and then another one for whenever you feel it's time to get an upgrade. Nevertheless, this is the one place where we'll argue in the favor of the less future-proof option, and for some very practical reasons. Say you have a single 16GB RAM card and it dies. Tough luck, your PC is now unusable. But if you have two 8GB cards and one dies, you can still use your computer until you get around to replacing the other card. This is true, you'll have a slightly higher FPS if you go dual channel, but honestly, this is just a very nice side benefit. It's not so large a difference that you'll regret having a single channel memory for a while if you can't buy the kit all at once. And that's pretty much that. If you're in need of a new RAM card, take your pick. We have ones that'll give you great value, ones for budget solutions, one for performance-oriented, and even ones for eye candy. The thing to keep in mind, however, is that so long as the capacity remains unchanged, these cards will all perform largely the same. Not entirely the same, but largely. Kind of like different graphics cards using the same GPU are all slightly different. Although you may thank us yet if you didn't know about how small a role clock speed and latency play in the grand scheme of things, because these are points on which predatory shops and pre-built rigs may try to squeeze the extra dollar out of you. Oh, and speaking of graphics cards, if you're curious about VRAM, we've made a whole video dedicated just to what VRAM is and how it impacts gaming, so do check it out. The link is in the description. And that about does it for this video. We hope that you found it helpful. Give us a thumbs up and subscribe if you did, and press the bell icon if you want more videos like this one. Now that 2019 has finally arrived, we plan to upload videos more frequently, and we hope you're as excited about that as we are. In the meantime, may your games be fun, and your losses few, and as always, we'll see you next time on Gaming Scan.